probably.
Okay. My name is Mika Neo.
All right.
Currently, I'm working in Always. It's a branding activation agency.
All right. Okay.
I'm in HR department as group HR manager.
Okay, that's nice. Okay. As you know, the topic today, we're going to be talking about the art and science of drafting or creating an employee handbook, right? So I would like to hear from you all. What are your major challenges actually you face when you actually going to employ drafting a handbook or creating a handbook, for instance? Anyone would like to share your experience or what are the challenges you have faced or are you facing currently? Then we can move on to the to speak in how to actually go about the topic today. Maybe Neo?
Okay, the challenges will be when we draft the handbook, right?
Mm-hmm.
We are not sure about the sections. Okay, which one come first?
All right. Okay.
And also the content.
Content itself. Okay.
Yes,
But
then also we need, sorry, yes?
It's okay. It's okay. Go ahead. Yeah.
Then also we need to revise like every 2-3 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay. In that case, but you have an existing handbook, right? And when was the last it was updated?
2019.
Okay, so that was quite recent. Okay, fine. Can we hear from, thanks Neil. Can we hear from Salim or Felicia? What are your challenges in terms of drafting your handbook? Or maybe Malsa? Felicia, can you hear me? Okay, Felicia doesn't have a mic. What about Malsa? All right, Felicia is in a discussion. Okay, anyway, let me just move on, okay? First of all, let's try to understand what is an employee handbook, okay? I'm sure most organizations do have employee handbook, but I've also come across organizations that do not have employee handbook for whatever reason they may have. Okay, so employee handbook, which is also known as employee manual or staff handbook, is a document which defines a company's key policies and procedures, and most importantly, it should actually outline the company culture. Right. So an effective employee handbook, it would clearly communicate your company's mission, values, policies, and rules to your new and existing employees, right? So an employee handbook provides, what shall I say, an introduction to what your company is and the way you work. So simply put, it's an employee handbook actually explains who you are as a company and how you function and what you expect from your employer. So probably the most important function of an employee handbook is setting clear expectations for both parties, right? A company as an employer and its employees. So an employee handbook, it should clearly communicate what is expected from the company's employees regarding their workplace behavior and performance and what they can expect in return. So basically it's that, right? So the handbook should be actually ideally given to the new employees on the first day at their work, or perhaps when you actually, a good practice would be when you attach it with the welcome letter or email it to the new employees as part of their onboarding process. Now, can I hear probably from some of you, how many of you do actually do this run through of your employee handbook during your onboarding process? Anyone?
Oh, yes, we have this handbook section during so-called orientation day for new staff.
Orientation. Okay, okay, that's good then. If that's done, it's good. It will be very helpful actually for the new employees, and it gives a sense of belonging the moment that's done. Okay, so why you should actually have an employee handbook? First of all, you must understand that there is no legal obligation to have an employee handbook. There's no law which says that. As you know, normally most organizations in Malaysia, you are actually bound by the Employment Act and the Industrial Act. So you're not legally obliged. But then again, most companies tend to have an employee handbook. And according to Gusto's research, Gusto is a research company, 87% of small businesses, which has a size of employees between 10 to 200 employees, tend to have. So why the overwhelming majority of companies choose to have the employee handbook? Of course, the answer is simple, right? Because having an employee handbook affects the many aspects of your business and how it impacts the bottom line of your business. So the 6 most important benefits of having an employee handbook would be: 1, formalizing your policies. So in order to write your employee handbook, you will have to clearly define your business and employee policies and procedures. So writing an employee handbook will help you actually formalize and organize your company policies, because and having them all in one place. Because every now and then you tend to have new policies coming in. So if you have it scattered all around, your employees are not going to be able to find that. So of course, that's the major thing of having it all in one place. And the second benefit would be promoting equality. So an employee handbook actually sends a clear message that your company has consistent and clear policies for all your employees. So it states publicly that the same rules apply to everyone. Okay, and promoting equality principles to your company. Time save, of course, even with the employee handbook, you tend to have many employees walking and knocking the door of HR and asking, how should I go about this? I want to claim this. What do I do? And everything. So I'll come to the part of training your employees and managers on this. So a well-written employee handbook, of course, answers to most common employee questions. So by having a handbook, you will avoid constant questions over policies. Okay, when they want to know something, of course, if it gets a little bit more technical, they come to the HR or to the managers, but otherwise they can always look up for the answer themselves and saving your time. And of course, the fourth benefit would be, what I can think of is legal disputes being prevented. Okay, having your policies clearly laid out for all your employees serves as a legal protection in a case of potential legal disputes. An effective employee handbook clearly defines your employment relationship, and very importantly, it would actually protect your company. So I'll come to the part of whether your employee handbook is contractually bounded or not. I'll come to that a little bit later. Okay. Improved onboarding, as I said, especially for new employees who have just started working at your company. It's a valuable tool in your employee onboarding because it helps new employees they get orientated and they can speed up faster, and they know what they can do and they cannot do, right? And of course, company culture being outlined, okay? Just like what Neo was asking, you're not sure what the content should be and how should start. You should always actually start your handbook with what your business is all about and what's your mission, what's your vision, what's your core values, that would actually outline your company's culture, right? So many would actually ask me, and I've had questions with participants or people who ask me, I've already have policy manuals, so why do I need an employee handbook, right? So though it can seem similar, but they are two different things. Policy manual and handbook, they're two different things, okay? Handbook tells employees what to expect, and it should be written in a language that is easy to understand, okay? Whereas policy manual, on the other hand, is a document that tells your employees how to do things. It can include more technical information, right? For example, many of us now, for the last 1 year, we've been like working from home and everything. So your employee handbook will tell employees that you can perhaps work remotely on a certain particular day, on a certain particular month, once a month or so. But you don't need to outline the nitty-gritty details in your handbook, right? You should save the practical information such as how to request for it and how the work is to be done, what are the expectations of remote working in the policy manual. So don't make your employee handbook very wordy where people don't end up reading it and they can't even understand what's being written. So the information on your employee handbook, okay, be very careful of this. What you write in your employee handbook should actually match what your policy manual is. It should not be seen as different things. It should not be contradicting. Okay, it should be on the same place. So what you give on your employee handbook is rather a taster than the complete policy. So think of your policy manual as your terms and condition document. So who should write? Of course, ideally, the answer would be HR should write, right? The HR or the CHRO or the human resource manager in most companies. That's what is done. And it makes perfect sense because HR are the people who are supposed to have the in-depth knowledge and understanding of the relevant company policies. But however, in smaller companies, I've seen the probably or even startups, it's being written by the CEO, maybe assisted by some of the senior management team or so on. So it's very important to have your executive team to be involved in the development of the policies because ultimately they are the ones who will be giving you the approval when a policy is being drafted. So another way is what I used to do in one of the organizations when I was tasked to do the employee handbook, I used a more collaborative approach. So meaning what I did was there was involvement from the senior management. There was involvement with a few senior staff who can be probably at a mid-level staff or a junior level staff, maybe not too junior. They can be probably about 2 years or 3 years. That would actually give a kind of team culture spirit. And you would understand the needs of all these staff who come from different generations of staff, different backgrounds, they have different needs. So that would actually help you to put it together rather than it's just HR and the management deciding on the policies and how you actually draft the employee handbook. And input from every category of the staff would be good, okay, in order to actually have the team culture and be more collaborative, for your employee handbook to be seen more inclusive, because that's what we actually want in our organizations now, right? To be more inclusive, right? Moving on. So how do you actually write an employee handbook? Okay. So an employee handbook writing is not a problem. It's not a rocket science, actually. There are many templates out there, which many people tend to do. You download one, you try to tukar here and tukar there a bit and everything, and then there you have it, you know. But then again, these standard employee handbooks are written in a way, I would say a little bit boring, and it does not reflect your identity of what your organization is, right? So of course, you can get some ideas from templates and everything, but it's good to have your own identity in your employee handbook. So the research from GuideSpark, what it actually revealed was 43% of the Gen Y, they don't actually read the employee handbook, okay? And 33% of the non-Gen Y are also not reading the handbook fully. And it gets worse. 11% of Gen Y have not actually even opened the handbook. And 36% have no idea where even the handbook is in a company. So if you go to some companies, if you ask an employee, sometimes they say, where's the employee handbook? You know, they'll say, oh, it's somewhere behind. It'll be stacked somewhere in one of the stacks in their files or whatever it is. They can't even find for it. So it'll be a good way. I think a lot of companies, the big ones, of course, they've moved to putting it in their intranet and everything. So it's a good way for the SMEs and the smaller organizations to actually follow that and put it in the intranet rather than having it all over the office, okay? So there you have it. You have the figures there. So a boring employee handbook is, of course, useless, and because no one ends up reading it. So you put in so much of effort writing it, but then end up no one reads it, and they still come knocking at your door and asking the simplest question, which actually can be answered by the handbook. So some of the tips which I can give to make your employee handbook to be more engaging would be keep it short and simple. Avoid long, complicated words and technical terms. Okay, that can go into your policy document or your SOPs or so on. And use appropriate language. Okay, the tone of the voice you use in your employee handbook should match your company's tone and culture. Suppose just now, if you're saying you're from an advertising agency, you need to be seen more exciting. You need to be seen more vibrant. So the tone could be a little bit different. Whereas if you come from a little bit more of a serious organization, like the organization I worked for previously was a standard setting body. Standard setting body, normally they're a little bit more, they have higher level of protocol. So probably the language to be used when drafting an employee handbook needs to be a little bit more serious. But then again, serious does not mean that you need to sound very authoritative or draconian. You can be more, you can use more active phrases there to be more inclusive, okay? So rewrite your company policies, go through your existing company policies and rewrite them in a concise, understandable language. As I said just now, make it personal and inclusive, rather than always saying you should not be doing this and you should not be doing that. You can always say our company, these are the things, ways things are done in our company when it comes to, say, taking annual leave. How do you actually say it? In our company, this is the way we do it. So that sounds a little bit more subtle, okay? So add images and videos. That's a new way of doing, rather than opening a handbook and seeing full of words and everything. Images tend to capture your mind better, you know, as people say, a picture paints 1,000 words. Some images, and if you have a paragraph which is very long, pull up the important points and, you know, highlight that points in some kind of color or something like that, and create some interesting formats. And if you're having it digitally on your intranet, put a message from your CEO or even from the CHRO. So that would make it more engaging, okay? So the contents of it, now the topics, one size does not fit all. As I said, you have many templates. It would be also good to, if you can assess handbooks of similar industries, okay, within your market. If you can have access, you can benchmark against that. You don't need to take the whole thing. Don't copy the whole thing. As I said, you need to be seen unique, but you can benchmark against that and how it's being done. So the contents generally, of course, it would actually start with your company goals, your values, you know, what's being expected, moving on to lumping it into bigger topics. If you're talking about, say, compensation and benefits, what are the compensations? And then you go into the subtopics. And if you're talking about code of conduct, in terms of, say, harassment policies, then you can go. If you're talking, you may have some diversity and inclusion policies, then you go into the subtopics. So how you arrange the topics, it really depends on what actually your company wants. What does the management want? What do the people of your organization want? So it would be always good to put the benefits on top first, because that's what people actually want to read. So that's the first thing when, employees open, they want to see after your company values, policies, and everything, you go on to your benefits. Then you go to your code of conduct. Okay. So you can always divide your employee handbook in part A or part 1 or part 2, where part 1 talks about all your perks and part 2 talks about your do's and don'ts. Okay, right. So basically, benefits, you have benefits such as what insurance being offered, and then you have legal policies, equal opportunity, confidentiality, zero tolerance to harassment. So all this can actually go in your employee. So step 1, how you actually develop your employee handbook is you review and make required revisions to your current company policies, or if you have new company policies. Like, as I said, many of us, we have been having work from home, but I also gather information from many participants that there isn't a work from home policy devised yet. So it's almost a year. If you already have that, it's good that you incorporate that into your employee handbook. It's a good time to revise your employee handbook. If you don't have, it is timely that it's being done now. Okay. So company policies and procedures, or SOPs you may call it, are used as actually the source of writing the employee handbook. Okay, you should actually scan the work environment and common practices that are currently in place. If there are no policies, such as the work from home policy, okay, then they should be developed. So once this has been updated and the SOPs are formalized, and then the legal counsel should actually review them, or the legal counsel should actually review the employee handbook at the end of it. Okay, so be mindful about overbroad confidentiality rules in your handbooks that would actually prevent employees from discussing or giving their opinion. Okay, instead, for example, there are some handbooks which says that do not discuss outside of work customer or employee information, including phone numbers and addresses and everything. Instead, you can always make it sound in a better way, rather like saying something like misuse or authorized disclosure of confidential information, and not otherwise available to persons or firms outside of company XYZ is cause for disciplinary action, including termination. Something like that. You can put it in that way. Okay. So conduct rules can also be overbroad. Okay. For example, in some countries, of course, in Malaysia, it's not. It's unlawful to state in the handbook to say that, be respectful of others in the company. Okay, such a statement could be construed by the employees as placing restrictions on criticisms. In some countries, they're very vocal, and voice of opinion is very important. So instead, you can, on the other hand, it could also say, you can state it in a way like being insubordinate, threatening, intimidating, or disrespectful, or assaulting a manager, supervisor, co-worker, customer, or vendor will result in discipline. Okay. So similarly, when you address social media policies, creating a delicate balance for employers between protecting your organization's reputation, and you should also make sure that you do not impede the employees' right to activities as well, concerted activities. So you can always ask them to put some disclaimer there, saying that whatever they're expressing, it is totally their own opinion and it is not of the organizations. Okay. After that, what you do is create an outline, like what I said. You can have big subheadings and everything, and then you can have little subheadings there. Okay, then make summarized versions of each policy and procedure. Suppose if it's an policy or procedure relating to overtime payment, okay, you don't actually need to put into your handbook the whole calculation of how you do your overtime. That can go into your SOP. So create a summary statement of that. And then a good way of doing it is, especially if you're on intranet, when you have your a topic there, okay, let's talk about probably application of annual leave, okay, how it's being done and everything, how many days is being offered, all that is already stated in your employee handbook. Put a link there to the SOP, you know, so you can always put a kind of remark there saying that, okay, this particular benefit is to be read, this particular clause is to be read with this SOP. So that makes it easier and it's clear to the employees as well. Okay. And very importantly, review the entire handbook. Once it's all done, review it, have a project team. It would be good to have a project team with that, and provide the finalized version to your legal counsel for review. In your organization, if you have a legal department, you can give it to the legal department. Otherwise, you can always get external legal counsel, because even as HR managers or CHROs, there may be legal terms, there may be legal implications to it if we don't get legal advice. We may go wrong with certain words there, certain acts can be updated, and there may be new acts always coming in. We may not be aware of that. So it's good to get a review from a legal counsel. And then, of course, you select your means of publication. Yes, there are many companies which still have it in hard copy, but it would be good to go digital in terms of saving cost, and it would be easier to make changes when you're on your intranet or it's on digital. Okay, so when you distribute your handbooks, okay, apart from of course the new hires, you will have your orientation and everything, but it's always good to have a kind of refresher course even for your existing employees, because what happens is someone who's been working very long, they may just forget what's it, or when changes are made, they just miss out on the changes, you know, they don't read the emails which are sending out or whatever. So it's good to have a refresher course every now and then on your handbook, and update as necessary. There are some organizations I know who, even the ones which I worked, 10 years employee handbook was not updated. So that had actually caused a lot of misunderstanding between the management and the employees. So as and when, a good practice would be reviewing it on a yearly basis, on a biannually basis, okay? The other thing is, what's very important, when you have an employee handbook, especially if it's a new hire, make sure you have a written acknowledgement that they have read the book after some time. So this is part of the onboarding process. So if you have an onboarding for 30 days or so, within the 30 days, get an acknowledgement. Not on the first day, give the person time to read and everything. Get an acknowledgement that he or she has read it. So that's one good way of protecting yourself, saying that your employee is aware of what is there. For existing employees, it may be difficult for you to get, if you're to get everyone to re-sign the whole thing again. So as I said, when you have a refresher course, it will be good to have the attendance of the employees, okay? The other important thing is for you to take into consideration whether or not you want to make your employee handbook as part of the employment contract. Now, I've seen in some employment contract that they say that this contract forms part of the employee handbook or vice versa. So you've got to be very careful when you do that, because and so disclaimers which you put in your employee handbook and those kind of clauses which you put in your employment contract Again, it should not contradict, because once you have stated in your employment contract that this is your retirement age, and then in your employee handbook, it's a different thing, you're contradicting. Okay, unless you say which would take precedence over which, that needs to be stated very clearly. Okay. So what are the problems with the outdated employee handbooks? Okay, so just consider, for example, you have a new employee who assumes health and benefits start immediately, right? Some companies don't actually start that immediately. You wait for probation period to be over, only then you start. And if there is, you're on a cashless card, you offer cashless card to your staff or something like that. There's normally a 60-day or 90-day waiting period, right? And if the employee ends their previous coverage before the new benefits kick in. So all these are issues which you need to address, right? So if you have an outdated employee handbook and you have gone into a new insurer, buying new insurance from another insurance provider, you've got to update. So if you don't update, these are the issues you will be facing. The employee might come back and say, no, your employee handbook said this, but then you have something else coming in already. So that's again an issue there, okay? So what happens, you're going to have some angry employees with mountain of medical bills at that time, okay? Moving forward, now, up till now, would anyone need ask any question? You can unmute yourself and on your camera if you want to, if you have any questions. Anyone? All right, Salim asks, is it a must for briefing on handbook? Okay. It's a good practice to have briefing on handbook. Okay, as I said, people tend to forget what is there, especially even if it's on your internet or your digital platform, whatever internal things you have, they forget. So it is good that it is, especially when you have new policies in, couple of new policies in and everything, to have a briefing. Yes, I know some HR will say, oh, we send it by email. But you see, words can be interpreted in different way when people read it. Okay, when there is a policy, as an employee, I would interpret it to my advantage. But to the employer, they would interpret to their advantage. So it's good to clarify this with a briefing and make sure the attendance is taken. I'll move on to give you some case studies on this, what happened and how the court looks at this. Okay, I hope I've answered Salim's question. Anyone else with any other question? Written acknowledgement on understand the handbook is a must. Okay. Written acknowledgement, yes, if it is a new hire, a new employee coming in, it would be good to have written acknowledgement as part of your employee handbook so that you are protected legally. Okay. Next time when the employee goes for some kind of case at the JTK or whatever and says tak ada, saya tak tahu pasal ni, saya all these things, you are protected, you're protecting yourself and say, no, look here, this person has actually read that and he or she is aware of all the do's and don'ts. So again, I won't say it's a must. There's no legal obligations to that, but these are best practices which prevents disputes later on. Okay. So some of the ways to make your employee handbook interesting, as I said just now, okay? Some people, if you go and ask, where's your employee handbook? It will be somewhere buried in the bottom of a file cabinet or somewhere, perhaps since implemented years ago and it's even forgotten, okay? Or maybe it doesn't even exist. So the key to having an effective employee handbook system is, of course, the senior leaders need to be on the same page and they need to support the policies within the handbook, okay? So many employers are breathing life in their employee handbooks. that includes redesigning, renaming, or reformatting it to be more exciting, bold, and engaging. So perhaps now it's also a time for you to look out. It's your turn to make it how engaging and interesting. So pull out your handbook and reimagine how you may use it to engage your employees. So one way is to call it something else. So there's one organization which I work, they actually call it staff rules and regulations. Oh my God, it actually sounds so takut lah, I want to hear also, isn't it? So especially with the younger workforce coming into your organizations now, make things a little bit interesting to hear, you know. So rather than saying just employee handbook or staff handbook or rules and regulations, which sounds so heavy, call it something exciting, you know, maybe like how things are done here, or XYZ company's culture book, or the people's book, something like that. Okay, of course, in bracket, maybe somewhere small in the writing, you can put employee handbook lah, you know, but to give a picture of what you are, you know, again, as I said, these are things which would reflect your business and your culture, right? So what is the difference between employment contract and handbook? Our handbook was kept at our headquarters and was never breathed. All right, Malsa. Employment contract is basically your letter of employment agreement, okay? Your letter of appointment, sorry, not letter of appointment, letter of offer, letter of appointment, all that is your employment contract. So after your appointment letter, some organizations would give you an employment contract. So that's a contract is something between an employee and employer. So that is legally binding you. Whereas an employee handbook is not actually legally binding. It's actually the best practices and what you can do and don't. Of course, some things would follow the Industrial Act and the Employment Act. So that's why I said it's very important for you as a HR and management to decide whether you want the employment handbook to form part of your employment contract. Because if you want to do that, you've got to be very, very careful with the words and how you actually craft and devise your employee handbook, because it's going to be a contract. It's going to be a legally binding document, if at all it goes to the court. Okay. So the best way I would say is not to say that it forms part of your contract, because your employee handbook, you're always changing it. Okay, but what you can do is in your employment contract, you can always say that you can always devise sentences or clauses that say that having companies say all other changes will be effective and communicated with the employee when there are some changes coming in, something like that along that line. Okay. So as I said, the second way to make it interesting, coming back to how you actually make, okay, give a nice, interesting name to your employee handbook. Now, the mission and vision is why and what makes your company soar, right? So you never want to miss a chance to remind your employees on the overall mission, vision, and your core values. Even better is when you create a compelling statements that connect them to them. So how you connect the role of an employee to the mission of the company. So it's important, right? You want them to feel that they are part of your company's overall success. So this is how you inspire them. And the true key to employee engagement, okay? They need to know how they fit in. So the next one is be personal and connect to the values of your company. So when I say that, what I mean is make your policies seem more human by personalizing them and connecting them to your core values. So I always tell people, bring back the human touch into human resources. Don't sound too draconian about things, okay? So make the kind of language to be fun and engaging. Earlier I said, promote your benefits and perks, because that's the first thing anyone would actually want to know as an employee. It's always what's in for me, employees, you know, they want to know that. So present it with a flair. Don't get past the yawn zone and dress it up a bit with some flair. Go beyond just emailing the attachment, and probably do a show and tell and make some presentation. Okay. And now the question of, okay, I hope I've answered Malsa's question. Anyone else has any questions now before I move on? Right, we have another about 15 minutes or so. Okay, now, does your employment handbook contain a specific language indicating that it should not be considered a contract? Okay, let's talk about whether it's legally binding or not. If it does not, then your company handbook potentially could be considered a legally binding document between employer and employee. So if you don't want it to be there, be specific, okay? Although it's very rare, employee handbook, it can actually create a contract in certain instances. Legally, the key factor in determining whether the handbook constitutes a contract is if the employer has issued a guarantee to the employee, or if the employee promises anything to the employer. So employment handbooks and how you enforce is important when it comes to dealing with employee discipline or termination. So small words like must, shall, or will can make a big difference when you interpret the intent of the employee handbook, okay? And they can have very serious ramification for employers. So be careful with your words when you're drafting it. An employee might see information in the handbook regarding performance improvement plan and mistakenly believe that he or she is entitled to something. Okay, I've seen some companies who actually put bonus provisions in terms of calculations and how it's being done, how it's being calculated. So that's very serious, because bonus is something, it changes year to year, right? When it comes to provision, when it's always based on performance. Unless maybe like if you're an organization with unions, like the banks, they have unions. So therefore, they are collective bargaining handbooks. Okay, it's collective bargaining. The handbooks are legally binded documents. But other than that, I don't see a reason why how it should be. So you don't actually need to put those kind of things there. So what are the possible risks, okay, which you should know whether it's legally binding or not, okay? It's not only about your setting your company culture, your policies and everything. What comes down is whether it is binding or not. So the possible risk could be whether or not it was the intention of the employees, whether the language used and interpreted or promises, guarantees made to the employees are legally bound. Okay, for instance, an employee could find themselves the target of wrongful termination. So if an employee was to let go in a manner inconsistent with the policies outlined in the handbook. So again, as I said, watch your terminology, very important when you're writing. That's the biggest challenge actually. Apart from how you're going to arrange your topics and everything, your terminology. Things like, as I said, will, shall, or must. These are quite definitive and leave little room for interpretation, because it's clear, because you're saying you will do it, you shall do it, or must do it. On the other hand, terms like may or might or could or should are more suggestive, right? So suppose take this for an example. If you have a clause saying that supervisors will provide new hires with weekly coaching sessions. Note the word will there. Will do weekly coaching sessions during a 3-month probation. So what the statement implies here is that the weekly coaching sessions are guaranteed, because you're saying it's will. So therefore, if you do not do it, you can be in trouble. And this probationer can always say that, okay, if you intend not to actually extend the probation, he or she can always go to JTK and say, no, I was actually supposed to be given this coaching sessions, but then I was not given. Okay, but in the handbook, you have already stated will, which you're trying to imply that it's a guaranteed thing you will do. So on To be safer, what you can do is you can say that supervisors may provide, okay, new hires with weekly coaching sessions during the 3-month period, probation period. So switching the term will with may, okay, that allows the employer in this case to actually communicate the company's best practice without implying that employers are contractually obligated to provide the weekly coaching sessions. So I hope you understand how you're actually supposed to word this. So phrasing it, the way how you phrase your clauses is actually very important, because you need to decide whether it's going to be a guaranteed thing you are going to be given. Like annual leave, of course, if you're following the Employment Act with the minimum number of annual leave you've got it, then it is a will because it's granted. But if you say that you want to give a little bit more than that, are you guaranteeing to give that? So that's something you've got to decide how you want to do it, right? So disclaimers. Of course, many employers, they choose to include disclaimers when creating an employee handbook, which states that the handbook is not to be interpreted as a legally binding agreement. So an excellent strategy actually to actually, how should I say, clear off unintentional misunderstanding, okay? So one sample would be if you say that I understand that I'm responsible for reading the handbook, familiarizing myself with its content, and adhering to all the policies and procedures of XYZ company, whether set forth in this handbook or elsewhere. Okay, right. So moving on, so the bottom line is, of course, refer to your Employment Act and Industrial Act when it comes to clauses of relating to acts, you know, such as EPF, anti-corruption, if it's you have some anti-corruption clauses to be put in, and if you have sexual harassment clauses to be put in, all these are relating to acts. So make sure you get this right, okay? And as I said, bottom line, when all this is done, consult your lawyer. So jangan pandai-pandai go and just, you know, publicize it and then you get everything wrong. So make sure you consult the right person, okay? So just as an example, okay, what the industrial court in one of the cases where an employee of about 17 years, okay, a brief background I'll give. In the case of Ho Seng Fat, who was the claimant, against, he was the employer who had been employed by the company of an employer. I will not want to mention the employer's name here. Now, this employee approximately was working or was into 17 years of employment. And what happened was the employer informed the employee via a letter that as he would soon be turning 55, he would be retiring, okay, in line with the terms and conditions of the employer's employee handbook, right? But what happened is the employee's employment contract did not state the retirement clause, okay? And the employee contended that he was never informed of a retirement policy or practice, and he was not aware of the contents of the employee handbook. So the employee reported in writing to the employer retirement notice, clearly stating his position that the retirement clause in the handbook did not apply to him. He said he was not aware because it was not in his appointment letter, it was not in the employment contract. So what happened? The employer did not respond to it, okay? So then the employee contended that he had been dismissed without just cause and excuse, while the employer contended that he had retired in accordance to the law based on retirement policy on the handbook. So at the end of it, long story short, what happened? The court said no. You know, the court said he was actually dismissed without just cause. So merely saying that he should be, because what the employer was trying to justify is that this particular staff is aware of employee handbook because he was actually making other claims. But then the staff said, no, I was doing that based on word of mouth and practices, but I did not know about this. Okay, so where the flaw was in terms of the employer was they did not take an acknowledgement simply because he was a staff of 17 years there. So no acknowledgement was actually taken. So at the end of it, the verdict was the industrial court actually awarded him with a 24-month back wages because he claimed that he was dismissed without just cause. So can you see the seriousness of this? If you do not update and you do not make it, you don't have a refresher briefing and everything. So I hope I've answered Salim's your question to just now already. Okay, right, couple of minutes to go. So in sum, I would say that some of the mistakes that you should avoid when you draft your employee handbook is don't take a boilerplate approach, meaning don't copy paste from somewhere else. You can use it as a benchmark, you can use it as a guide, but don't copy paste it. You need to actually understand what your company wants, and you got to write it in the right manner. Okay, you've got to make sure all your relevant policies are included in your handbook. Don't miss out on anything thinking that, oh, this was emailed, I put up at this notice board, so therefore it doesn't need to go into the employee book. Never make that mistake. Okay, don't omit disclaimers. Make sure you have the right disclaimer on, and don't craft overtly restrictive kind of clauses. Okay, and have very effective anti-harassment policy. I know many organizations back in our country, especially in our country, we don't take anti-harassment policies to be very serious, but when it actually comes to the court, it's actually pretty serious. So make sure that's done in the right way, and make it user-friendly, and never fail to train your line managers in terms of your employee handbook. They are very important. HR should always train them well, because when your employee actually goes, sometimes their first line of communication is with the line managers. So some line managers, sometimes they feel that they know everything, they pandai, they will tell all the wrong things. So make sure you train them well first, okay? And right, so drafting employee handbook is a skill. It's not rocket science, it's a skill, because if you go wrong, it can cost your company a lot of money actually. So be wary of that in terms of your phrasing, the tone of voice, okay? Don't, as I said again, don't sound too draconian, don't sound too harsh. You cannot do this, you cannot do that and everything. Your employee handbook should actually have the ability to give instruction in a way that reflects an adult-adult relationship. Okay, it takes some practice, but it will get easier the more you do it. Okay, so one way is probably, you see, when it is poorly worded, how you say travel expenses submitted with the wrong form will not be reimbursed. It sounds very harsh. So how do you fix it? So probably you say travel expenses are reimbursed when submitting using the proper form. Can you see how you play around with the phrasing and how you make it sound it better, right? So in summary, okay, the HR handbook, of course, is necessary and crucial for the following reasons, okay? Ease of employee administration. Of course, for some organizations is to fulfill your ISO certification, fulfill any government regulatory requirements, maybe such as MACC. Okay, customer audits. Sometimes customer audit also, they want to see all these things. It creates a consistency in your company's actions and processes. It creates a more fair, clear, and transparent HR management. Of course, to avoid this dispute and frustration among employees. Okay, and of course, to build your employees' confidence on the company. So always tailor-make to suit your company's operating environment and not any general handbook. It should actually regularly be reviewed 1 to 2 years or so, or whenever there are changes to the employment law and relevant law of Malaysia. Okay, so situations like business continuity during any pandemic situations like the one we were in should be addressed well. Okay. So once the handbook is in place, when you have your handbook in place, make sure you have the relevant form and process flow should be put in place and updated accordingly. Don't have different set of things. If you're talking about retirement age, your SOP, your forms, your process flow, everything should be on the same page. Don't have contradicting things, because when you have contradicting things, you have problem when disputes arise. Right, so 3 more minutes to go. I think I know within an hour, there's a lot to talk about drafting employee handbook. I can't finish in an hour. But for those of you who are interested, 21st and 22nd, I have a program on Industrial Act and Employment Act and how you actually engage your employees into this. And I will be also touching now and then along the program on how you actually write your employee handbook and how you devise your clauses. You can actually reach out to Excel, Norman or Liana on this, and they can help you more how to actually enroll for themselves. Right, Salim has a question before we go. Can we set after receive 3 warning letters of serious taking drugs? Okay, the 3 warning letters, there's nothing legal to say that it should be 3 warning letters. I don't know why a lot of people always have this notion of 3 warning letters. Okay, now if it is a serious offense of taking drug, violence is involved, you don't need 3 warning letters. You can actually go into suspension or termination immediately because it's serious. This is where when you have your employee handbook, you need to actually define your major misconduct and minor misconduct. Major misconducts does not need this kind of show cause letter and all that. You can go into immediate drastic actions actually. Okay. So anything else? Would anyone like to share or say anything before we go off? I think we have 1 more minute before we go off or before I pass on to Norman. Anything? If not, thanks for joining me today. Oh, there is somebody.
Hi, Shoba. I have one question.
Yes,
so
Yvonne.
Normally we will quote the rules and R&R from the employee handbook in our warning letter. For example, if you haven't absent how many days, then we'll quote in the employee handbook and under the clause 1 point something. But
Correct.
how about those like misconduct that not spelled in employee handbook? Because impossible, like every month we need to revise the employee's handbook, right?
Correct.
But because nowadays and more misconduct, they're very creative, they come out. Okay. So that's why how is it we can no need to quote from the employee handbook or just plug in the misconduct in the warning letter?
Okay, what you can do is, okay, that's why I said this is something, it's good to have a project team when you are actually working on a handbook, because one mind, if you're just having 1 brain or 2 brains sitting into it to do it, you may not be able to think from many perspectives. Okay, so based on all your experiences and everything, list down all the major, how you want to categorize your major misconduct and your minor misconduct. Okay, state that in your employee handbook. But again, you see, employee handbook cannot state everything what's going to happen, just like what you're saying, right? So you can always put a clause saying that anything which is detrimental to the organization's reputation shall also be construed and shall be construed as a discipline matter, and the management has the discretion and right to decide which is what and put that kind of clause in just to protect yourself.
Oh, okay.
So that's one way of it. Of course, I'm giving you can word it in a better way. Offhand, I'm telling you something like that. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Yvonne. Right. Anyone else before we say bye? And I hope to see you all maybe on the 20th, 21st, where I can speak more about this. It will be a 2-day session. Right. If not, thank you very much for joining today. Maybe I can see you all in sometime soon, 2 weeks time. Okay. And I will pass it on to Norman, I think, or Excel, to see what they want to say. So thanks for joining.